Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here. It is Halloween, which means this particular Arsecast is going to be extra spooky. No, it won't be. No. It's okay. Sometimes I like playing with reverb. What can I tell you? I don't even have a costume, don't have a disguise. I do have a gigantic bowl full of stuff for the kids when they call to the house later on. You know, all the stuff they really like fruit, unsalted peanuts, deep fried kale, chocolate Brussels sprouts, all the Halloween classics. So that's what lies ahead a bit later on once the sun goes down and everything gets kind of spooky. No, sorry. Anyway, look, we're here to talk about football. We're here to talk about Arsenal's 3-0 win in the Carabao Cup last night against Preston, which sets up a quarterfinal against Crystal Palace in December. And with me to talk about that from the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast, it is Harry Symeou. Hello, Harry.
Hello, Andrew. How are you?
I'm all right, thanks. Yeah, good to see you too. Thanks for being here. 3-0 win in the Carabao Cup last night. Quite an interesting game, I think, in some ways. And obviously, there's one player I think we'll focus on in particular. But I'm curious as to how you were feeling before this game in terms of the team that you might have liked to have been picked, and then the team that you saw picked by Mikel Arteta. Was there much of a difference? I think we've all been a bit scarred, haven't we, by injuries over the last little while. So it's sort of like, well, if he plays, the under 16s in this game, everything's fine. We know he's not ever really going to do that. But, where was the balance for you in terms of, potentially resting some players, brings back William Saliba, starts Mikel Merino, Jurrien Timber, who came off against Liverpool. He started the game as well. I mean, was this, do you view it as a risk, or is this kind of the way he has to manage his squad and maybe get, for example, someone like Timber, that these 45 minutes could be actually really useful for him?
Yeah, I think he needs to find that balance, doesn't he, between protecting people, but also making sure that those players on the periphery of things are sharp enough and ready to go when called upon. And so I thought he got the balance right. When I picked my team in the morning for the game, I think there were 2 or 3 differences. For example, I think I would have played David Raya in goal because I thought Preston away on a cold Wednesday night, that old cliche, it might be a bit too much for a young goalkeeper. And I know that Preston are a very direct team and they can be quite physical. We didn't see any of that really last night, but that's what they are generally speaking. So I would have probably played David Raya. I don't think I would have started Jurrien Timber, but everything else was pretty much as I thought it would be. I thought Mikel Merino, who's obviously still trying to get up to speed, having had his start to the season delayed, could do with the minutes. And I thought taking him off at the break and sort of just spreading those minutes out among the wider group of players was the right way to go. So I was happy with the team selection, to be honest. I don't think we can afford anymore, Andrew, to say this is a competition that is just right at the bottom of the list. Like, I know it's the one that we would probably be upset about the least if we were to go out of it. But ultimately, going into this season, there's been so much chat about the need to crown off the progress we've seen over the last 2-3 seasons with some silverware. I just don't think we're in a position to turn our noses up at trophies like the Carabao Cup because we're now one victory away from the semi-finals. Yeah. So you got to take it seriously.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think Arteta has always taken the cup seriously, but I think there's this perception that he doesn't really care, or that we've taken things lightly in certain periods when it comes to the cups, not just the Carabao Cup, but the FA Cup as well. People say we haven't done well in the FA Cup, and that's absolutely true. We have not done well in the FA Cup because we went out in the 3rd round, I think, against Nottingham Forest, and we all remember how unhappy Mikel Arteta was. There are still quotes doing the rounds from that reaction because it was part of the Amazon season. But then I think the season after we had Manchester City, and then the season after we had Liverpool. So we've been a little unlucky in terms of the draw. And I think, the EFL Cup we went out last year to West Ham wasn't a great performance, but I went back recently to have a look at the team that he picked that night, and it wasn't like he picked a team full of children. He picked players some of whom were on the periphery, but in that game I think Declan Rice, Martin Odegaard, Bukayo Saka all came off the bench. It just wasn't a good night. But, I think you're right. We are a club and we are a team that needs some silverware and needs some success. And I think everything Arteta has said, during his time here is about taking every game seriously, every competition seriously. And I think that played into the sort of team that he picked yesterday evening.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting, like you've got players like, for example, Alexander Zinchenko, right? Who, looking back at the weekend, I know he had a torrid time against Mo Salah last season, but I was surprised that Mikel went for Miles Lewis-Skelly over Zinchenko, multiple Premier League winner sitting on your bench. You've got a desperate problem at left back and you bring the kid on ahead of him. And listen, that's not to take anything away from Miles Lewis-Skelly. He absolutely deserved the opportunity. But it just goes to show, doesn't it, that, what we thought the squad was maybe 12, 18 months ago, it's not the same anymore. It's evolved, it's changed, the dynamics changed. The group is not on the same kind of sort of hierarchy as it was before. There are players that would have been nailed on starters, Jesus and Zinchenko, just to name a couple, 2 seasons ago that aren't anymore.
Yeah.
But you still need to keep those tools sharp for when you're ready to use them. And just as an example, I thought Zinchenko was really good yesterday, like getting on the ball, controlling things. He is someone that will be of use to us. And I think the bigger you build the squad and the stronger you make it, the more able you are to go to ties like this and come away with all 3 points. With progress to the next round, I should say. But you get where I'm going with it.
Absolutely. I think the Zinchenko thing was very interesting because, last round Miles Lewis-Skelly started and there've been these questions about the pecking order and about, why has Lewis-Skelly come on ahead of Zinchenko, a much more experienced player, but he's come on in games where you would naturally think, even with some of Zinchenko's defensive lapses, which have been part of his time here, not all the time, but, you can't ignore the fact that they've been there, that you would think the experienced option is the one that you would go for. But he's gone with Lewis-Skelly as an 18-year-old. And this debate about, is it fitness? Is it the pecking order? What is it? What's going on here? And then he played Zinchenko last night. And part of you immediately thinks, well, okay, he's playing Zinchenko in the Carabao Cup because maybe he wants Lewis-Skelly for Premier League minutes because he doesn't have Calafiori for a while. Timber might be needed at right back, and we'll come to, why that might be as well. I thought that was interesting, particularly the way he talked about Zinchenko in the pre-game press conference. The difference between what he said about Zinchenko and the difference between what he said about Zinchenko and Lewis-Skelly was really, it stood out to me. When Arteta wants to be vague, we all know he can be quite vague, and he said Zinchenko has proven for many years that if he has to do something, he has the ability to do it. And then he talks about Lewis-Skelly. He's got a huge personality. He plays with belief, a lot of commitment. He's got all the qualities we want. There is something going on there in that dynamic. So I found it interesting that Zinchenko was the guy who was in from the start in there. Although I take your point absolutely that, to keep this squad as deep as it needs to be, you have to give players like him the minutes.
Yeah, that's the key point, isn't it? You need to be able to call on those players when required to do so. And maybe the fitness issue was a thing going into the weekend and looking at that left-back position. We know Zinchenko had been out for a while. He hadn't had any minutes since his return to the squad. So, yeah, and, yesterday was the first game he started this season since the opening day, at the Emirates Stadium. So you need to keep everybody ready. You need to have everybody engaged as well. I think that's really, really important as well. It's not just the physical aspect of it. Are you fit and ready to go when called upon? But are you mentally engaged and focused with the group? Do you feel a part of the group? Or can you end up in a situation where certain players start to feel detached? And if that's the case, how can you expect them to bring their A game when required to do so? So it's a really, really interesting thing. There's a few players last night that really kind of stood out to me that I really sort of enjoyed watching. Gabriel Jesus getting a goal was massive because the minute he scored, you could see the smile on his face. You could see that he was then trying things and taking people on and skipping inside people and all the rest of it. And that just seemed to have faded from his game in recent times. So it was a big night for him as well.
I agree. I think this was a really important game. Like if he'd gone another game, and with all due respect to Preston, if he'd gone through a game against lower league opposition without scoring a goal or without some kind of goal contribution, I think technically he gets an assist for the Ethan Nwaneri goal, but we'll talk about that and the quality of the finish, which I think is, you got to give a lot more credit to the finish than the lateral pass from Jesus. Nevertheless, it is a goal and an assist on the night for Jesus after a period since the end of January where I don't think he's had either. What I found interesting about this goal was the fact that he didn't have time to think. There was no deliberation in his mind. The ball came, was headed back down by Jakub Kiwior, a Gabriel Martinelli free kick to the back post. Kiwior heads it back down. And there's really only one thing that Jesus can do or needs to do in that situation. That's put his foot through the ball and leather it into the back of the net. And I think where some of the frustration, let's say, this season with Jesus has come from the fact that he's sort of overcooked things a little bit. Like he's got himself into good positions and then tried to beat a man, or he's played the wrong pass, or he just, he hasn't quite, when he's had time to think about things, found the right decision. Whereas this moment, it was just there. Just hit it, score, and hopefully that's a weight off and a confidence boost for him going forward because, if we're talking about needing all of our players, we need him, and we are going to need him over the course of, the coming weeks. There's a lot of football to play. I know there's an interlull in a couple of weeks, but after that, it's just every 3-4 days there's a game.
Yeah, absolutely. And, what we were saying earlier is that you're going to need all those players. And Gabriel Jesus, whether you rate him or not, whether you think he's a solution for us up front or not, that's what we've got. And yes, Kai Havertz is probably the number one option at Arsenal right now in terms of that centre-forward position. And he scored again last night, and he continues to impact games in the way that we know he can. But Jesus has an important part to play. And you're right to say it was instinctive. I quite like the way that he sort of peeled off of the defender as well, sort of in anticipation of maybe the ball getting knocked down. And Kiwior does really well as well. I don't think he gets the credit for recognising that from that position he's probably not going to score, and just making sure that he puts the ball back in the danger area. And that's exactly what he does. But Jesus just had that swagger about him after he scored that goal. And I know there'll be people listening that go, well, it's Preston North End and he should have that swagger and he should be able to do it. But I think sometimes we underestimate what happens when a player gets in their own head. And it certainly felt like in recent weeks, that's where Jesus was. You're bringing him on for sort of 10, 15 minutes at the end of a game when the game state is a difficult one. And then that's another appearance on his stat sheet, but it's another game without a goal. It's another game without an assist. And sometimes you have to look a little bit deeper than just the sort of overriding numbers and understand what the guy's been going through. He was a massive part, Andrew, of Arsenal getting back to a level where they were competitive. That hasn't been forgotten, and he shouldn't be disrespected as a result of that. Can we move on from him and can we get better? Yeah, of course we can. But he still has plenty to offer, in my opinion.
Well, yeah. And like you say, he is what we have until January at the very least. And then, whether Arsenal do anything in the January transfer window in the attacking third remains to be seen. So, for all of us and for him in particular, it's great that, he's broken that drought. I think you can get a little bit, like you say, in your own head when it comes to particularly forwards when they don't score and when they haven't made a contribution, and it becomes like a weight, doesn't it? And you just need one to go in, and hopefully that will provide him a confidence boost. Before we start talking about Ethan Nwaneri, I did want to ask you about Raheem Sterling and what you thought of his performance. I was left a little underwhelmed, and I did player ratings on Arseblog News, and quite a few people were like, hey, that's very harsh. He was really good last night. And I went to have a look at the stats, and the stats looked very nice. 4 shots, 2 shots on target, 2 key passes, 6 dribbles. He did well in the build-up to the second goal to keep the ball alive over on the right-hand side and played it inside to Jesus and then to Nwaneri. But if we're talking about a player who I think people want to see deliver something tangible in terms of end product, whether it's a goal or an assist, I think he's in that sort of that bracket, isn't he, with Gabriel Jesus, where you're thinking all the experience, you're playing a lower league team, we want to see you score a goal. And to be fair, I think he nearly had one right towards the end. only for a brilliant piece of defending by the Preston centre half, who got there and cleared it off the line. I think he probably would have had a goal, and maybe that would have changed my perception of his performance. But what did you make of him?
Yeah, I mean, that opportunity that he had at the end, we were saying in commentary, like, don't look at Raheem Sterling there. Look at the defender.
It's brilliant.
He's done an excellent job of following the ball and making sure that he gets there to make the clearance. I agree with you. I was a little bit underwhelmed because, as you say, there wasn't anything to crown off the performance with, but there were some encouraging moments. I think in the lead up to the Ethan Nwaneri goal, there was a pass play to him that wasn't very good, and he sort of turned on the accelerators to make sure that he got there, kept the ball in play, showed that sharpness that we've come to associate with Raheem Sterling over the years. And we're starting to see that in flashes and in glimpses. And I think for me with Raheem Sterling, you got to remember as well that for the first few weeks of the season, he was nowhere to be seen. He had been cast aside at Chelsea. He wasn't playing games. He was training by himself, from what we understand, or as part of their group of 50 extra players that have no future at the football club. And, you know, it was going to take him some time to get up to speed. Add to that he hasn't really played that much football for us. And I think it's still a little bit early to judge whether Raheem Sterling is going to be a good signing or not. If he produces one or two massive moments at the end of the season, then it would have been worthwhile, right? Given that we got him in on loan. But back to last night's performance, I agree with you that generally I was underwhelmed, but there were just flashes and glimpses of what he can do. I always think that he's much more effective from the left-hand side. I
was going to ask you, because he switched over, obviously, when we changed things around a little bit in the second half, and I think he was better on the left.
Yeah, he absolutely was. And also, having someone like Jesus in the side who is happy to go out there at times and open up that sort of inside corridor for you where you can go dribbling into on your stronger side, coming in field. I think that really works for Raheem Sterling. And some of his best moments in the game, I thought, came late on when we saw that pattern of play emerge. So I'd like to see him used more from the left, but I also understand that part of the reason we brought him in was to cover Bukayo Saka. And obviously you've got Trossard and you've got Martinelli in the group, and Jesus' tendency to drift there as well makes that difficult. But it's clear that he's a much better player when operating from there.
Yeah. Anyway, there are positive things I think that, you know, he could take, and like we say, he came very close to scoring a goal last night. But the goal of the night obviously came from a young man that everybody is really, really excited about, and you know, I feel often like I'm repeating myself when I write about him, when I talk about him. The only thing I can really say is that I just want to see more. So it's like getting a little taste, a little amuse-bouche every time you see Ethan Nwaneri, and it whets your appetite for more. And last night was, you know, no exception to that, because, you know, think about the little cameo at Leicester and you're going, oh God, we could have had him on for 15, 20 minutes more in this game, and maybe it wouldn't have been quite as tight at the end. You know, this is what I think is quite fascinating about him, because your young players, there is a how would you say, like there can be an inconsistency, right? When they come through and they have a good performance and then maybe not such a good one, you go, well, he's young, he's still learning, he's developing, he's maturing, he's learning game states and how to play with other people. But every time I've seen him, I've just been so impressed by the technical aspects of his game. The way on the ball that he just sort of pops it off, moves around, gets it back, pops it off, moves around. The decision-making belies his tender years. He's only 17, as we know. And to score the kind of goal that he did last night it's just unbelievable. He's like our third highest scorer so far this season, albeit with, you know, all his goals coming in the Carabao Cup. But it's just so exciting and so impressive to watch him, and you can really understand why there is this clamour for more.
Yeah, for sure. Every time he's been on the pitch, you've looked at him and gone, yeah, this guy's the real deal, or he's at least on his way to being the real deal. And I think that's the key point here. I think as fans, it's really, really easy to kind of get carried away and say he should be starting every game. I remember when we first learned about the Martin Odegaard injury, and there were a lot of people out there saying, throw Ethan Nwaneri in. Don't change the system. Don't tweak the system. Don't adjust anything. Just throw Ethan Nwaneri in there, like for like. And I was dead against that. And I was dead against that because I felt like asking him to to come in and be the Martin Odegaard was just way too much pressure to put on a 17-year-old kid who is still finding his feet. And what I didn't want was for that to impact him in the long term. Although the fan in me looks at it and says, we should have played him for longer against Bournemouth and we should have turned to him on more occasions than we have. If I try and take my fan hat off for a minute and I look at it from a maybe more coaching perspective or a more analytical perspective, I actually think Mikel Arteta's handling his development in the perfect way. Even with the messages that he's putting out into the media, you know, he said yesterday, we want to build him sort of brick by brick. Yeah. He said that, you know, things like the players always wanting to pass to him and giving him the ball, it shows you that they believe and trust in him. All of that stuff is perfect for me. And I just think as much as we want to see him do it and as much as we want to see him thrive, I think we should be a little bit cautious about building him up too much just because he is so young. And although we've been super impressed by him, the sample size is really, really small. Now, I'm not saying he's not going to get there because I absolutely believe he's got the talent. But I think it's really important that you manage him the right way. And having that protective shadow of Martin Odegaard to come back in the team and take the burden of creativity in that role, I think is a good thing for Nwaneri because you can feed him in when you need to without him having that responsibility that a 17-year-old could crumble under.
I saw this tweet last night from at Hand of Ozil. And this is just a really interesting stat to sort of put what you're saying in perspective. He says Nwaneri needs 150 minutes more before March of next year to have played more senior minutes before the age of 18 than Bukayo Saka and Phil Foden combined. So that development trajectory that you talk about, which I absolutely recognize, and I think that is obviously part of why I'm not saying he's being held back. I don't think that's quite the right way to put it, but he is being used, you have to think sparingly or deliberately sparingly by Mikel Arteta as part of his development process. But there's just still part of me that says, like if tomorrow we have to play an important Premier League game, whether it's against a team at the top or a team at the bottom, if we have to play a Champions League game and Ethan Nwaneri has to play because for reasons, right? I would have no fear whatsoever about him. Whereas I think there are young players who've come through in the past where I would be a bit more cautious about their readiness and about their ability to cope with the situations that they're involved in. So it is that balance. Like you say, there's a fan hat where we all want to see. It's this romantic idea, isn't it, of a young kid coming through the academy, making the grade. It's why we all love Bukayo Saka as much as we do, because he has done exactly that. And Nwaneri is following that very, very same pathway. And there is something just undeniably romantic about a player coming through and doing that. But, you know, I also think there is a good case to be made for him to have more minutes, because every time he comes on the pitch, he's impactful, whether it's scoring a goal last night, whether it's scoring 2 goals in the previous round, whether it's sort of changing the dynamic a little bit the way he did against Leicester. You know, he never looks out of place. And it is a small sample size, like you say, but from what we've seen, there's no question in my mind that this guy is ready.
I think it depends on the manager as well in a lot of ways. Like, if this was Ethan Nwaneri coming through under Arsene Wenger, he'd absolutely be starting games. And he'd have absolutely been starting, in my opinion, in the absence of Martin Odegaard, because Arsene, you know, was someone that would look at your talent and say, it's there. If you're good enough, you're old enough. I think with Mikel Arteta, there's a little bit more of an emphasis on the physicality of his teams. And I do wonder if that's what's held him back. Like, does he look at Ethan Nwaneri and think, superb talent, but maybe still needs to build himself up a little bit to be able to give me what I'm looking for in the very biggest games? You know, we've seen him, you know, bring in Mikel Merino as a midfield option because of his size, because of his aerial ability, because, as people have named him, he's the jewel monster. You look at who he spent £105 million on, Declan Rice. And there's a real emphasis on physicality. And with Martin Odegaard, you got a bit of both. I'm not saying he's the strongest, most powerful player in the world, but he will press, he will hold his own in that environment. And I just wonder if that's the bit that Mikel's waiting for before he says to Ethan Nwaneri, there you go, it's your position, go in there, make the most of it. I just wonder if that's the thing holding him back.
I think you could be onto something there because like Martin Odegaard, like you say, is not the biggest, but physically mature at this point, whereas a 17-year-old still has a little bit of growing to do, so maybe that is it. But he certainly not announced himself, but if he's previously was knocking on the manager's door, he's fucking hammering it down right now, isn't it? And I think another aspect of his game that well, I'm not going to say we don't talk about it, but we don't have too many opportunities to talk about it, is sometimes a player has an ability to be in the right place at the right time in the box to get themselves chances at goal. And last night he scored an amazing goal. What a finish. And Arteta said, yeah, he scored one of those in training. We know he can do that. But like, it's just an unbelievable... What I love most about it is just how simple he makes it look and how effortless. It's like, oh yeah, anyone could do that, but it's not. That's not true, because the precision, the power, the pace on that ball, to shift away from the defender, put it in the top corner, unbelievable. But there were other chances. There was a chance that he kind of scuffed in the first half. There was one that was set up by Mikel Arteta that he probably should have had. There was one where he hit the top of the bar in the second half. There was another one that he sliced it wide, I think, but it's that ability to be in those areas in the box, which I think you can coach into certain players, and players can develop that over the course of their careers. But you also have other players who have this uncanny ability to just be there where the ball is going to drop, and he seems to have that, and that was, I think, another part of his performance last night that I really enjoyed, along with the fact that 80 minutes on the pitch and he gave he one bad pass or gave the ball away once, which is just, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's that ability, you mentioned it there, to anticipate what's coming, to anticipate how patterns of play could develop, to anticipate what areas you should be in the event that, the ball breaks to you, and what you can do from there. And I know we've sort of touched on the goal, but the best thing about the goal for me was that when the ball's coming towards him, he's already made his mind up about what he's going to do. He knows what the next step is, and that shows an ability to stay composed in those situations. A lot of young players will probably take a touch, panic a little bit, not know whether they're going left or right. And, in the end, it becomes a bit of a nothing. But for Ethan Nwaneri, it was very clear when that ball came into him, my intention here is to work this onto my left foot so that I can find the top corner. And it just works all like clockwork, because it's something clearly, Mikel Arteta, as you mentioned, said it, that he's done it in training. That's something that he's done over and over and over and over again, and it's become instinct to him, and that's what's so special about it.
Very impressive performance from Ethan Nwaneri, and at halftime there were a couple of changes, which I guess, in the absence of any information at that time, might have been like, oh, what's going on here? Jurgen Timmer came off, Mikel Merino came off. It was Kai Havertz and Partey came on. Thank you very much for having a much better memory than I do. He did say afterwards that those substitutions were planned. He said, we have a lot of issues in the back line. We wanted to share the minutes. We lost Gabby. Obviously, Gabriel went off against Liverpool. We lost Ben White as well on top of the other players. For me, that's the sort of the note of caution, or the only sort of downside from last night, the performance, is the potential absence of Ben White, which would be a little bit of a blow, because he spent a bit of time out injured, came back and maybe has another injury again. Look, we don't know. It's still early days. Arteta will meet the press tomorrow, but that was just a little bit unfortunate to read that, and fingers crossed it's not anything too serious for Ben White.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that it was just literally Ben White. Obviously, he came back from an injury recently. Didn't look at 100% at Bournemouth, I didn't think. And then obviously we had the game against Liverpool at the weekend where he was asked to play as a centre-back. I thought he did a really good job for what it's worth on the day. And I think maybe they just looked at it and thought, we've got Newcastle away coming up. We've got Chelsea away coming up. We've got that trip to the San Siro in between as well. Yeah. And, maybe it's just the smart thing to leave him out and give him a breather. And I think that's probably the case with Gabriel as well. I think, all the noises coming out of the club seem quite positive about, the problem that meant he had to go off at the weekend. But I think Mikel Arteta's just wary of overloading people because, we've got a lot of injury problems at the moment, and we've got a squad that is, yes, quite big and bigger than it has been in recent years, and it's got lots of quality, but there's a fair few players in there that have had sort of not recurring issues in the sense of the same problem, but that regularly break down. And I think he's very wary of that, and he wants to protect them as much as he can. All
right. Well, look, again, let's hope it's nothing too serious. Third goal of the night scored by Kai Havertz. Great header, great centre-forward play. I think Jakub Kiwior actually deserves a lot of credit for this goal, because the cross in, from a position you don't necessarily expect to see Jakub Kiwior in, cross in was excellent. 2 assists on the night for Kiwior as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was commentating on the game and I said Kiwior delivers into the box or something to those effect, to that effect. And when the goal went in, after Havertz sort of powered the header home, I started to want, like, have I got that right? Was that actually Jakub Kiwior who stepped into the inverted position, taken the ball on and delivered a cross of that quality? But yeah, brilliant delivery. Havertz just makes it look so easy. He just takes the power off the ball and just makes sure he guides it into the far corner. And the confidence he's playing with is unreal. But just to circle back to Jakub Kiwior, I think that was really important for him, the 2 assists that you mentioned, because when he came into the side at the weekend, there were question marks around him. There has been question marks around him, if we're being completely honest, since he joined the club. Nobody's saying he's a bad player, but is he Arsenal level, is what people have been saying. And I thought he was partly culpable for the equalising goal against Liverpool. He wasn't the only one. I think there were 2 or 3 players you could look at, but he was partly responsible. And then those questions start again and they start to intensify. So to turn up, start the game, keep a clean sheet, but also deliver something more and show that you've got more to your game, I think was really, really big and important for him. And I'm delighted for him.
Yeah, it's good. If even if you have doubts about a player, if that player plays well, then it can only be good for the team, because there will come a time where we need him. And as we saw against Liverpool the other day, he was needed. Arsenal had a couple of goals disallowed. I think there was an offside from Havertz, and it was Nwaneri who put the ball in the net. I think that was disallowed, and Havertz had one disallowed. Jesus, ball went over the line, apparently. We can't say for sure, but I think it probably did. I'm not going to get too aggravated about that. But, there was still time then for Arsenal to bring on Miles Lewis-Skelly, to give him some minutes in place of Zinchenko, who was never going to last the 90. Bukayo Saka got some minutes as well. Interesting comments from Arteta there as well, because he sort of said, Saka said, look, if I've come all this way, I want to play a part. And, for us, we're like, well, what do you need to bring Bukayo Saka on at 3-0 for in a game like this? It's already won. If he gets an injury, but we really do look at these situations with a glass completely half empty, or half full, not half full, half empty, 100% half empty, completely empty. When it comes to Saka, there's just this, don't do it. But players' desire to play and come on and maybe get some rhythm and get some minutes ahead of, what you say are some difficult games coming up. Maybe it's useful, maybe those are the decisions that are made, with a bit more depth than we sort of look at them as fans who just naturally worry about a player as good as he is when he's just coming back from injury.
Yeah, we've been scarred by things like that in the past, haven't we? So I think that lives long in our memories, and we struggle to maybe understand the more scientific side of things, which is, give him 20 minutes and get him, working his muscles again, and that will help him build up from the position that he was in 2 weeks ago, where he wasn't fit to start a game. He got a period of time against Liverpool, and he started to gas out a little bit towards the end of that game, I think it's fair to say, and give him a bit more here at Preston in a comfortable position where he can then start to build up towards his peak condition ahead of a really difficult run. You mentioned Miles Lewis-Skelly coming on there as well, and what I thought was nice to see was in the last sort of 10 minutes or so when Aidan Heaven came on, that meant that Kiwior went to left back and Miles Lewis-Skelly was able to step into the midfield. Now, he's a player that's been brought up playing as a midfielder. And in recent times, he's been utilised as a bit more of a left back. And we all agree that in the Arsenal team under Mikel Arteta, there's a real synergy between the left back and centre midfield position, because you're almost required to play both at the same time. But it was nice to see that, because when I mentioned that I thought Kiwior was partly culpable for the goal against Liverpool, I thought Lewis-Skelly was too. And I had to kind of remind myself after the game, when the emotion kind of subsided a little bit, that actually this kid isn't a left back by nature. He's trying to learn that role whilst trying to settle into a strong side. as a youngster, relatively inexperienced, all at the same time. And to get to see him move into the midfield, get on the ball a little bit more without that pressure of being the last man, and pop it off left and right was really good. And I think that'll do his confidence good too. For
sure. I mean, we even saw a bit of that, his comfort in central areas, because he's played a lot there as a young player. In the Liverpool game, where that moment where the sort of three Liverpool players converging around him on the edge of our box, and he held on to it, then bang, played a pass, and I'm not saying set us free, but certainly gave us some space to go through midfield. That ability he has on the ball, that comfort, I think that stands you in good stead as a defender, because quite often as a defender you're facing the play one way for most of the game, whereas if you can play, midfielders have got to do it slightly differently. They've got to play with their back to play quite often, much more, let's say, than a defender does. But if you've got that ability and you've got the versatility as well within your team to move someone like Lewis Skelly, who's come on at left back for Zinchenko, into midfield, it augurs well for him and his future. And like you said, there was a debut for Aidan Heaven, a debut for Tommy Setford in goal last night. I was a bit surprised to see Setford start, because he sounded a little bit cautious on him in the pre-game press conference. Hard to judge too much, but if your debut for Arsenal ends with a clean sheet, not a bad night for you as a goalkeeper.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought he looked really, really comfortable with the ball at his feet. And you could see straight away why he is someone that Arsenal have looked at. And Inaki Kanya's obviously been a part of that recruitment process. And they brought him in from Ajax in the summer with the hope that he can develop and eventually go on to play a big part for the first team, I'm sure. I thought there were a couple of crosses where he sort of got caught in no man's land. And I don't want to make too much of a big deal of those. It's more of a kind of critique so that he could improve, rather than it being,
sure,
Tommy Setford's not good enough and all the rest of it. I appreciate the magnitude of the occasion for him. But there was one in the first half, I think it was from a free kick from a wide area, where he sort of half came, didn't get anywhere near it, and the defender headed it wide of the near post. And there was one in the second half as well, where again, similar thing, the ball was put into that zone in between the back line and the keeper, and he sort of starts to come but doesn't get there. It was like he was stuck in the mud almost. And I think that those are two things that he'll probably look back on when they go through the video of the game and want to work on. But generally a really good debut for him, and I'm excited to see what he can develop into.
Yeah, exactly. It's decision-making and knowing when to come and when to commit. And look, we've seen far more experienced goalkeepers than Tommy Setford in the past have problems with that kind of decision-making, where they decide to come and don't get anywhere near it. So it's obviously a learning experience for him. So all in all, a pretty comfortable 3-0 win. It means Arsenal are through to the quarterfinals of the Carabao Cup. Crystal Palace at home is a pretty decent draw when you look at some of the other teams that are still in it.
Yeah, for sure. I was delighted when I saw the draw last night. It's a bit annoying, isn't it, that Crystal Palace have decided that they're going to start winning football matches now.
Well, they did beat Tottenham at the weekend, so we have to give them their dues for that, in fairness.
Fair. Yeah, fair. They did beat Crystal Palace, and to win at Villa last night. I know it was a changed Villa side, but it's still a really encouraging result for Ollie Glasner's side. But it's a tie that we should be winning. I'm really interested to see if, now that we're going to face Premier League opposition, Mikel changes his approach to these games, because he's under pressure to win a trophy, and not an immense amount of pressure, not to the point where we're talking about whether he should stay in the job or not, but all the outside noise is, well, Arsenal have stepped forward, but they have to actually crown it off with something, otherwise it means nothing. It's Progress FC, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So I wonder if he'll look at it now, levelling up against Premier League opposition. Then you look at the potential to be in a semi-final once you get past that. I wonder if he'll look at it and go a little bit stronger. I mean, it's a hard balance, isn't it? Because you've got those players that have got you there and they deserve to be there. But at the same time, if an opportunity presents itself to win Silverware and move forward, you kind of have to do everything within your power, I think, to try and grasp it.
Oh, yeah. I think, the closer you get to a final, or the closer you get to a piece of silverware, the stronger you go naturally. And I get the idea that, if you've played young players along the way and they've helped you progress, that maybe you should reward them. I understand it, but it's a bit romantic. I think the the reality, the pragmatic view of a situation like this is if you get to a quarterfinal, we've been a relatively kind draw in terms of Bolton, in terms of Preston, two teams from the Championship or League One. Bolton were League One, weren't they?
Yeah.
So it has been relatively kind. But even last night, the fact that it was away from home meant that he started Timber, he started Saliba, he started Zinchenko and Jorginho and brought Thomas Partey on. And you have experience across that front line in Jesus and Sterling and Martinelli, Marino in there. So it was already pretty strong. I think the idea or the ideal situation would be to be able to remain strong, but maybe not risk, depending on the fixtures that you've got around these games, not risk anybody that doesn't need to be risked. I did have a look at this just to see, because this game takes place on the 16th, or the week starting the 16th of December. So it comes, we've got a home game against Everton on the Saturday, and then it's actually 2 games in a row against Crystal Palace, because we're playing Crystal Palace in midweek, and then we're away at Selhurst Park. So that's always an interesting dynamic, isn't it? When you play the same team in successive games or in really close proximity, that will be one where I think he'll go strong at home, but maybe not quite as strong as he would for an away game against Palace, the same opposition.
Yeah, it's a really difficult balance to find, isn't it? But it's also something that I don't think you can preempt too much. I think you've got to look at the state of your squad at the time. You've got to look at what the sort of the fitness levels are of some of those key players. You might have players that are absolutely flying and you think that taking them out of the team is going to impact that. There'll be players that you think, are in the red zone in terms of their fitness levels, and you can't afford to risk it, even though you'd have normally played them in that type of fixture. So I think it's one that you've got to judge when we come to it. But I don't think we leave London now in December, which is interesting. So yeah, there's an opportunity there for Arsenal to make it through to a semi-final. And once you're in a semi-final, you got to give your absolute all to go on and win the competition. And just imagine, there's been doubt at the start of this season. And there was a bit of that at the start of last season where we weren't quite clicking. The Havertz in midfield thing wasn't really working. And people were starting to say, have we regressed? And I think we've had a lot of those conversations at the start of this campaign. But if you could win Silverware in February, the boost that gives you, as we've seen with so many other teams in the past, to then go on and achieve more, it could be huge. I think we've really, really got to go for this. I've never really been massive on the Carabao Cup. I've not been one of those people that said it's super important. But doing my research ahead of yesterday's game, we haven't won this competition since the Wenger days. That's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And we've only won it twice. A grand old football club like us to have only won it twice is something that I'm quite keen to see us put on the honours list.
Yeah, I think was it 93 the last time we won it?
Yep.
So that was the year we won both FA Cup and League Cup in the same season. So I'm with you. Obviously I have my priorities, and everyone listening to this will have their priorities. And there'll be people who will say, who cares about the Carabao Cup? Who cares about the FA Cup? It's all about the Champions League. It's all about the Premier League. And look, I get it. I get that point of view. Come to Cup final day, though, people that say who cares about that will be absolutely glued to their TVs or trying desperately to get tickets for a game, to experience what a cup final means. Does it mean everything in the world? No. But does it mean something? Absolutely. To win any kind of cup final is fucking great. It's a brilliant experience. And I think as well, for not just for the manager, I think for the players also, to experience the that winning feeling and to want more of it. This is a team that has come really, really close to the Premier League in the last 2 seasons. And, I think what we've done has been absolutely outstanding. But I think as a player, you ask them, do they want to play in a cup final at Wembley? Will they say, it's just the Carabao Cup, who cares? They'll all want to play in a final at Wembley and win that final and lift the cup and sing the songs and get the medals. So I think we have to look at it from that perspective as well. It's not just the benefit to us as fans, but it's what it brings to those players and what kind of belief it gives them that they can then use that cup success as a stepping stone for something else. Like I always make the point that I think the win at Anfield in 1989 probably doesn't happen if we don't win that League Cup against Liverpool in 1987, I think it was. So the players then took a lot from winning that cup, even if, I think we can all say it's not the most important cup of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Manchester City out of the competition now as well, and with Tottenham and Manchester United being drawn against one another, I know Liverpool are still in there as well, but I saw enough in that first half against Liverpool to believe that we are the better side, as long as we've got people available and in the right condition. So, yeah, I completely agree with you. The winning feeling is really, really important, and to overcome that first obstacle, because Mikel Arteta's won a trophy with Arsenal, yes, but not many of this group were in that team. It's a completely different team. It's a completely different group. There was a handful of players that were in that 11 that won the FA Cup in the way that they did. It's a completely different Arsenal side now. The evolution has happened. There's been a lot of player turnover. We're just in a different place now. So for this group, it's really, really important. I agree.
Yeah. Was there anybody in the team that day that's still in the team? I don't think so. Bukayo Saka was on the bench.
Was around, wasn't he?
Saka was on the bench. He didn't get off the bench. But every single player who won that FA Cup, who was in the team that won the FA Cup, I think, where is the final? Yeah, they're all gone. The team that day: Martinez, Bellerin, Tierney, Maitland-Niles, Holding, Luiz, Ceballos, Xhaka, Lacazette, Aubameyang, Pepe. And there was Bukayo Saka, and he's the only one from that entire squad who's still there. The bench: Matt Macey, Socrates, Kolasinac, Torreira, Matt Smith, FA Cup winner Matt Smith, I should say, Reece Nelson, who is technically, I suppose, still at the club, Joe Willock and Eddie Nketiah were on the bench that day, and only Bukayo Saka was the guy who was on the bench who didn't come off. So, there is something to be said for what Silverware could bring to this group of players. Just a couple of quick things before we shoot off. How do you view now these next 8 days for Arsenal? It's a challenging period, isn't it? And not for the first time this season. You've got to go to Newcastle away, which is always difficult, even if I think defensively Arsenal should be able to cause that Newcastle side problems. Inter Milan away, and then Chelsea away next Sunday. And I think a different Chelsea from last season, or certainly the Chelsea that started last season and developed a little bit and matured a little bit when they cut down the 77-man squad, whatever it was. So it is a really, really important an important week, particularly as we go into an international break and there's a lot of time for rumination and poring over things and hyper analysis of everything if things don't quite go the way we want.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was supposed to get easier after that run of fixtures that we had previously, but obviously that's not the case. I wonder if because we played Leicester, Southampton and Shakhtar and none of those performances were particularly inspiring. I know we got the results and then we lost at Bournemouth. I just wonder if that made what should have been the easy period feel horrible, and now it feels like we've never had a decent period and it's just been horrible from start to finish. I think it's really, really important that we get at least 4 points from the 2 league games. I'm not greedy. I think that if we got 4 points, it wouldn't be a disaster. I know that other people would see it in a different light. I think you should aim to get 6, obviously, but with that trip to the San Siro as well, sandwiched in between, I think that's going to be a really, really difficult ask, particularly with the injury problems we got, with people dropping like flies, it seems. I think I'm quite comfortable personally, Andrew, with the fact that we're a little bit behind in the table, just because I think over the course of the season, when the fixtures even out, we will make up ground. I don't think there's any need right now to lose your minds about the fact that we're a little bit off the pace, because our fixtures have been significantly harder, not just a little bit harder, but significantly harder than the sides that we're competing with. Factor in all the injury issues too. I think, obviously, I want 6 points, but if we got 4, I'd kind of quietly be quite content with that. I don't know about you. How many do you think we need to take to still be in it?
Well, look, maybe I'm a bit more greedy than you. Obviously, everyone wants 6. I think you do have to look at certain groups of fixtures in almost like isolation. So if you're playing, I don't know, Southampton and 2 other relegation teams, and you're playing them 1, 2, 3, and maybe playing them at home, I think you've every right to expect that Arsenal go and get 9 points.
Agreed.
Whereas I think if you look at Newcastle away, even if like I said, I think there are defensive issues that Newcastle have that we should be able to to exploit. You then have to go to Inter and you're playing Wednesday and you're coming back and you've got Sunday, of course, against Chelsea. Those are 3 really difficult away games. I sort of feel sometimes a bit more confident about us away from home because I don't know if it's deliberate or if, I'm just projecting here that sometimes I think there's just a little bit more focus with us when it comes to away games. But look, if you go through that run unbeaten without losing, even if one of those games or 2 of those games are a draw, if you draw away at Inter and you draw one of Chelsea or Newcastle and win the other one, I think you kind of have to look at it in the context of that run and say, that's not bad. Could it have been better? Yes. But I also think, we have to be cognizant of the demands that are on the squad, both in terms of the fixtures themselves and also just sort of the travel and the fact that you're away from home, and there is that element to things.
Yeah, exactly that. I'm not saying I want 4 points from the team.
No, I agree. Yeah, I know.
I absolutely want 6, but I just think sometimes you have to recognise where you're at. And we've had a stuttered start to the season, not necessarily even in terms of the results. I mean, we've lost 1 game, and the way people reacted to that, it was as if, we'd been on this 6-game losing streak and everything was crumbling around us. That wasn't the case. But I guess we're probably a little bit scarred by the fact that we've been in these title races over the last couple of years, and we've seen how perfect Manchester City can be when required, that we've almost conditioned ourselves to believe that any dropped points are a disaster. Now, I personally don't think the title will be won with as many points this season. I think that us, City and Liverpool over the course of the season are probably all going to drop more points than we did last season in terms of the pace being set. So, yeah, I mean, if you get the performances and you go there and you win at Newcastle, and then after a horrible trip to Milan, you come back against Chelsea and you take a point from the bridge against a very good Chelsea side at the minute. You have to say that. They've improved a lot under Enzo Maresca. I know it's early days. But if you come away with that, you can say, I wanted the 6, but, you got to be realistic about where we're at, as you say, and we're still without our most important player, in my opinion, in Martin Odegaard. Bukayo Saka's just come back from an injury. We don't know what the situation is with Ben White. We hope that Gabriel will be available. We've had to patch up a lot of things over the last couple of months, and we just need to stay in the hunt is how I'm looking at it right now. I'm not going to obsess over points differences and gaps and things like that. I don't think you need to at this stage. I think that comes later on in the title race. You shouldn't be feeling this way in October.
Sure.
Is the point I'm trying to make.
No, I get you. I think it is part of the reality that we exist in the Premier League with Manchester City as well. But I know exactly where you're coming from. Right, we had better leave it there. As ever, Harry, an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, mate. Always a pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you very much indeed to Harry. You can find him in all the usual social media places, and the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast is available to you on YouTube. You can find a link in the show notes and in all the usual podcast places as well. So look, we're going to leave it there for this particular episode. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here. Tomorrow over on Patreon, we will look ahead to the game against Newcastle on Saturday, a game, of course, which has Jared Gillett on VAR. Once again, this guy is involved in officiating an Arsenal game way more than any other official for any other team. What is it? What's going on? Is it in his contract that he has to be somehow involved in everything to do with Arsenal? There's probably a couple who are getting married this weekend, plan their wedding. They'll turn up to the church on Saturday, and fucking lo and behold, there on the altar is Jared Gillett, somehow finding a way to fuck up their beautiful day. Anyway, we can talk more about that on Patreon. You can join us for a preview podcast. It's patreon.com/Arseblog. If you'd like to join us, it's $6 a month to get access to everything that we do over on Patreon, which also supports everything that we do that's free for everybody on Arseblog as well. So patreon.com/Arseblog. For now, though, take it easy, and we will catch you on the next one.